So last time I showed you guys how I built the different components for the ship. Now it's time to put those gears into hyperdrive and get this thing finished and painted.
I'll start out by cutting out the middle rungs from these black plastic pieces here. Later on, these will be attached to the back where the rear sails will be at. I did initially think of making these out of chipboard, but I found this plastic and opted for it instead. It's at this point in the project that I'm not entirely sure where I'm going or how exactly it is that I'm going to get there. I know I have to get these three pieces connected together, and I'm probably going to end up using this paper straw and clad it out later to hide the glue seam lines between them. It'll make more sense as I show you them. I do need to figure out the angles for attachment, but it won't matter if I'm too far off. The hot glue will help shore up any gaps or errors in my measurement, and the cladding will then help to hide the shape of the straw. Instead of building an engine for the end of the pipe in the back, let's further cannibalize the Star Wars toy for parts. This jet I think will work just fine. It just needs a little bit of trimming and maybe some sanding. The tool that I have here is a pipe cutter. Among the different types of cutters, this is my favorite for PVC. I've already attached the pipe and this cardboard bit together, but I don't like the relationship of it and the forward section, so I'm going to shorten it with this cutter. So now it's time for me to go ahead and put those plastic pieces from earlier on. So I'm going to put those on with a bit of super glue and then some little strips of chipboard to add some more texture to that section instead of it just being a flat pipe. These plastic pieces help to bulk out the silhouette of the main structure itself. Eventually the sails will be on it and that will change the silhouette, but I wanted the main solid structure of this thing to not just be straight, and I wanted little bits of texture to deviate from the silhouette. So while I work on that, I did want to let you guys know that we now have a Patreon campaign. So if you wanted to support the channel, head on over to patreon.com/miniaturemedium. There you can go ahead and see what perks we have for Patreon members. You can go ahead and see what we're working on, get behind the scenes access to the channel.
So for the majority of colors, it's just whites and grays. This gray coat actually helps knock down one of those steps. However, I am going to probably need to make my own grays. So I've got white and black to make a rather boring neutral gray. Otherwise, I could mix ultramarine, raw umber, a little bit of white, make a more interesting looking gray. The blue will also come in handy for the lights, and maybe some of the green areas. These are the colors that I'm going to use for those. And the green areas are just inside the ring. I need to get this on my close-up cam. So this ring, the greens are just on the inside of here where the actual map is in the game. As far as brushes go, I'm just using some cheap brushes that I have downgraded to terrain brushes, mainly because any of the wide flat open areas I can get with the big one, and some of the smaller areas I can get with this one here. I might go into my nicer brushes for some fine detail work, but honestly I think this is going to be the workhorse of the entire paint job.
First thing that I'm going to be doing with the paint job here is I'm going to tackle all of those white areas. That's going to take me the longest amount of time because I'm starting off with a slightly darker base, and to get a solid white, I'm going to need at least 3 coats. Satisfied with the coverage of white on here, let's tackle the gray parts next. I am going to have to mix my own gray though. I won't be using black and white though. You can go ahead and mix your own gray with blue and brown and a little bit of white. It will give you a bluish tinted gray if you use more blue than brown, or it'll give you a muddy gray if you use more brown than blue. Honestly, it is just going to be monochromatic, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's what I'm seeing in the reference image as well. So it's going to be different shades of gray, white, a almost black, a black, and then different colors for the windows. The only thing that's going to be not monochromatic is going to be the solar sails. Those actually pair really well with this bluish gray monotone. So I mentioned those light areas, those recesses that I was talking about in the last video that I needed to leave. That's where I'm going to put the windows at. And it's simply just going to be dots of color, trying not to leave a pattern, but I'm human, we love patterns. So it's going to be teals and blues and whites. The only area really that's not going to be monochromatic is the inside of the ring, where I'm going to be painting the map. That is going to have its own mix of browns and greens, and there's going to be some blue in there to designate water, of course, but I've got this weird party flag material here, or fabric rather, that I'll be using for the solar sails. It is a lot brighter than I was wanting, a lot brighter. But I'm going to go ahead and use this. I'm going to darken it up and stiffen the fabric at the same time by using a wash that has both medium and PVA in it. It's not going to make it completely rigid, but it is going to make it stiffer than the fabric is initially. To me, this entire process was more tedious than actually building the ship, but I'm really glad that I decided to do this instead of using paper. I mean, there's nothing wrong with using paper, but I really like how this turned out. Speaking of tedious, it did take me quite some time to cut out all these shapes. But once I had them all cut out, it was just a matter of using some 14 gauge wire, the same stuff that you would typically use to hang picture frames, and super glue those to the fabric to make the attachment points for the sails. How did I get those sails attached to the main structure? Well, first, I started to pre-drill some holes with my pin vise. Quickly, though, I realized that that was not going to be the best method to do this. I grabbed my drill, and it was way faster to punch through that PVC. After that, a little bit of super glue, and then I could go in and bend the sails into the orientation and direction that I wanted. So there is one small detail in the reference image that I was actually really happy to find, and it was an artificial sun that goes back and forth between the forward section to the rear section, in between the ring. It's a concept that makes complete sense that a vessel like this would need an artificial source of light and heat in order to keep the organisms on board alive. I had to include that. This project was so much fun. I just hoped that I had gotten it done sooner, like a couple of weeks ago. That would have been ideal. But I've got it done now, and that's the point. I'm looking at it right now, sitting above my window, and it makes me happy. I mean, of course, in hindsight, you can always look back and see that there's some things that you could have done differently. Things that didn't line up exactly the way that they should have, if you were trying to exactly copy something. But I'm going to cut myself some slack because I wasn't trying to exactly copy something. If you enjoyed this content, please like the video, subscribe, and hit that bell icon so you can be notified when I put up new videos. Have fun, be creative, and happy hobbying.